Hey, you don't know me, but everyone knows that Team Fortress 2 has a lot of terrible weapons, one of the most infamous of which is the Sharpened Volcano Fragment. It's a redundant addition to Pyro's toolkit, and it also pales in comparison to some of Pyro's other unlocks, while somehow at the same time not being one of his worst melee weapons. That aside, one common anecdote that you've likely heard before is that the Sharpened Volcano Fragment would be decent if it was on any other class. And I wondered to myself, just how true is that? Now unfortunately I'm not a modder, nor do I know anyone that can, but what I can do is speculate just how effective the Sharpened Volcano Fragment would be on each of the 9 classes in tier list format. As you can see, the tiers go from completely redundant being at the bottom, being outclassed by pre-existing weapons at just above, niche but still not good above that, decent, then at the top, why isn't there something already like this for the one class that I believe this applies to? I've also added additional icons for the Demo Knight and Battle Medic subclasses because I felt that they were unique enough to get their own segment with how the Sharpened Volcano Fragment would work with them. One last thing I would like to note before I begin is that for the 3 classes that have different mechanics for their melee weapons, I'll be treating the Sharpened Volcano Fragment like they're one of their own melee weapons, with those mechanics being attached to them. This is so that I can't just go, well actually the Sharpened Volcano Fragment would be F tier on the Engineer, because now he can't upgrade his buildings. No, that would be lame. Now with all that preamble out of the way, let's begin by going with class order, starting with the Scout.
Hey, who's on fire now?
With the Scout, the Sharpened Volcano Fragment isn't going to outclass some of his more supportive melees, such as the Atomizer and the Candy Cane, but it could still shine in terms of a combat-focused melee. Not ideal, but now the Sharpened Volcano Fragment runs into direct competition with the Boston Basher. Comparing its damage, if you take into account the damage reduction that all of Scout's melees have, it does technically do more damage, totaling at 88 compared to the Boston Basher's 75. This would give it the niche of being a safer Boston Basher at the cost of not being able to help your medic build Uber as easily, though that kind of just more as a competitive scene thing. But then there is another issue. You see, the Scout doesn't just have one option for damage over time, he has 3. His other options for bleed, the Flying Guillotine and the Wrap Assassin, both provide ranged DOT effects at a range. Sure, the Wrap Assassin's bleed doesn't do nearly as much damage as the Sharpened Volcano Fragment, but does that really matter when you can apply it from a range and then use your primary to finish your target off? Another thing to note is that bleed is simply a much better effect than Afterburn. Sure, they have basically the same effect, but bleed is harder to get rid of. With Afterburn, you can remove it via medkits, friendly medics, dispensers, Pyro's Air Blast, bodies of water, Girardi, Mad Milk, and gas pressers. Wait, what the fuck? Meanwhile, bleeding can only be removed by those first 3 options. Now you might be saying, but couldn't the Scout just stack fire on top of bleed damage? Yes, but you can already stack bleed damage on top of itself so long as it comes from 2 separate sources, which, oh look, there's the Flying Guillotine and Wrap Assassin again. So yeah, all things considered, I think the Sharpened Volcano Fragment is completely outclassed by Scout's other options in his arsenal, to the point that I think it'd be our first D tier.
I just tore you a new chimney, Smokey Joe.
Soldier is a class that doesn't get much inherent use out of his melee slot. Usually the rocket launcher and the shotgun are adequate enough for whatever range you'd need them for. And even with either a pair of boots or one of the banners, rocking away from danger is probably the better option when you're good at it. Still though, Soldier does have combat-focused melee weapons, those being the Equalizer, the Market Gardener, and the Half Zatoichi. Compared to these 3, I think the Sharpened Volcano Fragment has a decent niche here. The Equalizer is just a bad weapon, the Market Gardener is a gimmick, and the Half Zatoichi is a bit clunky and awkward to use on Soldier due to its slow deploy and bolster speed. Equipping the Sharpened Volcano Fragment would give the Soldier a decent combat melee that also gives him additional type of damage. The only problem is that you'd probably rather be using either the Escape Plan or the Disciplinary Action for their utility. But still, I think the Sharpened Volcano Fragment would fill the niche of being completely combat-focused better than the 3 melee weapons that Soldier already has. So for him, I put him in the A tier. You probably already know what the problem with the Sharpened Volcano Fragment is with the Pyro, so I'll just make this quick. The Sharpened Volcano Fragment does not stack up to Pyro's melees, whether they are better for its utility, team synergy, comboing, or DPS. Even then, if you didn't have any of these weapons, even if you only had stock and the Sharpened Volcano Fragment, it would still be outclassed because Pyro can light enemies on fire with his flamethrower. D tier.
Go to hell and tell the devil I'm coming for him next!
Unlike the classes that we previously discussed, Demo doesn't have any utility weapons other than the Pain Train, which is only situational depending on the game mode. So really, the only thing we compare the Sharpened Volcano Fragment to is the stock bottle and the Ulip Pool. And the problem with the Ulip Pool Caber is that it's inconsistent and slow. So really, it's just the bottle versus Sharpened Volcano Fragment. And I feel the Sharpened Volcano Fragment would actually have a decent niche here. It does more total damage if every tick of afterburn hits, and the psychological effect or annoyance of getting lit on fire would probably cause some enemies to keep their distance, meaning that they'd stay out of the range that Demo would be least effective in. So yeah, I'd make this the S tier of the video, actually.
There can be only one!
What corruptest, I hear you say? What about Demo Knight? Well, unfortunately, unlike Demo Man, Demo Knight wouldn't have much use for the Sharpened Volcano Fragment. I mean, he already has his pick of health on kill, extra charge duration, faster charge filling, all of that all at once, and the Skull Cutter. You'd be trading all of that, plus the increased range, for fire damage. Yeah, that's another D tier.
The burning you feel? It is shame.
Heavy's melees have a similar issue to the other classes, like Scout and Pyro, where there's no reason to use them when your primary weapon is already more than adequate enough at taking care of melee ranged enemies. This means for Heavy's melees, they all have some sort of utility instead of just raw DPS. Heck, even the Warrior Spirit, which has his biggest damage buff out of any weapon in TF2, has a health on kill effect. Now, how does the Sharpened Volcano Fragment, a weapon that does no such thing, stack up to these weapons? Not favorably, I'd say. Putting the Gru and the Fist of Steel aside, the Sharpened Volcano Fragment would be more consistent than the Warrior Spirit, the Eviction Notice, and the Holiday Punch, but it would be completely useless compared to the Killing Gloves of boxing, for one simple reason. Why would you want fire damage when on kill you can get 5 seconds of crits on any weapon? With that said, I'll put the Heavy in C tier because at least the Sharpened Volcano Fragment would give him damage over time, which is something he doesn't have.
Woo-wee! Making bacon.
I'm going to tell y'all now, the Engineer and Spy sections are going to be weird, because the Sharpened Volcano Fragment wasn't designed with their mechanics in mind. That being said, there actually is precedent for the NG to have a melee weapon that doesn't lean into any of his unique mechanics, which coincidentally competes with the same exact niche that the Sharpened Volcano Fragment does, the Southern Hospitality. Interestingly enough, just like with the Boston Basher on Scout, the Southern Hospitality doesn't do as much damage as the Sharpened Volcano Fragment, with the axe just slightly beating it out DPS-wise. However, that doesn't really matter much because the main thing that you're going to be using these on are spies, specifically to track invisible spies. And in this regard, I still think the Sharpened Volcano Fragment has the Southern Hospitality beaten out, based on the simple fact that lighting an invisible spy on fire makes them way easier to see than if they were bleeding. This doesn't make the Sharpened Volcano Fragment the best option for Engineer. I'd probably just rather rung the Jag or the Gunslinger, but hey, being a better anti-spy tool than the one that Angie's already got is enough for it to sit nicely into B tier.
Whoops! That was not medicine!
Medic is interesting, because unlike other classes that have combat-based melees, the Medic is the only one who explicitly doesn't, as every single melee weapon in his kit is utility-focused. Considering the fact that melee is meant to be a close-range self-defense weapon, you'd think that he'd have something that primarily helped him with that. That being said, I don't think the Sharpened Volcano Fragment is going to be accepted for that role anytime soon. While you think that the fact that the medic could now light you on fire with a swing of his melee would do something, people have been dealing with him suddenly one-shotting him with a random crit of the Uber Saw, so I would imagine nobody's going to keep their distance away anytime soon. Plus, while the demo was more effective the further away you were with him, Medic only has his syringe guns, and those are way less threatening. Sure, the Crusader's crossbow is more effective at longer ranges, but even then, those long ranges are harder to hit, and even if you add the skills, there's the fact that getting plus 25% on your overcharge would just be a completely better option rather than fire damage. That being said, there's nothing in Medic's pre-existing toolkit that outclasses the Sharpened Volcano Fragment, so I guess by technicality he's another B tier.
Come over here! I promise I will heal you!
However, on Battle Medic, where you don't care about helping your teammates and are focused on what else? Battling. I think the Sharpened Volcano Fragment has a better niche. The only other option for damage you have other than stock is the Solemn Vow, which allows you to see the enemy's health. This ultimately would come down to what you value more, raw damage or information. I personally think that these two options are pretty evenly matched, so I think it's safe to say that Battle Medic is another merc slotting into the A tier.
I'm just getting warmed up.
Once again, we run into a class with no supportive melee options, and once again we run into a weapon that directly competes with the Sharpened Volcano Fragment in the damage over time category, that being the Tribalman's Shiv. However, oddly enough, just like with the Southern Hospitality and the Boston Basher, the Sharpened Volcano Fragment beats the Tribalman's Shiv out in DPS, but it's even worse this time because the Shiv has a greater damage reduction than the Sharpened Volcano Fragment. Though there is another problem. The Shiv was designed to help you track spies, something the Sniper already has a more adequate tool for this job, that being Jarate. While yes, there's nothing stopping you from running both the Jarate and the Sharpened Volcano Fragment so that you can cover people on piss before promptly lighting them on fire like the menace to society that you are. You know what's better than lighting people on fire? One-shotting them. And if you're running the Jarate, why not run the Bushwhacker too? You get better synergy due to the fact that the Bushwhacker crits on every mini-crit that the Jarate provides. So overall, despite being a better spy tracker than the Tribalman's Shiv, I'm gonna have to put Sniper in the C tier, right alongside Heavy.
Burn in hell, you mumbling abomination!
And last is Spy. Spy is unique from the other classes, because other than Demo Knight, he's the only class whose game plan is based around his melee weapon. With the Sharpened Volcano Fragment filling that role, I'd imagine that you'd end up leaving burning corpses of your victims behind, which would probably have the added effect of hiding your presence, due to passerby likely thinking that there's a Pyro killing their entire team, which is kind of opposite to the Spicicle in that way, I think. That is, if they notice the bodies in the first place and aren't being told by their teammates that you're out and about. Even then though, the Sharpened Volcano Fragment would be weird on Spy. It'd essentially just be the stock knife reskin, except when you butter knife, you deal 30 damage, and then on top of that have a 60 damage of afterburn. I don't really know if there's any use case for this, but at the same time, all the other knives in Spy's kit are pretty evenly matched, I'd say. All of which except for the kunai. The kunai, combined with the Dead Ringer, basically just lets Spy be immortal and take damage all day, just so long as he can find someone whose back just so happens to be turned at the right time. I can't even say that the Sharpened Volcano Fragment would at least give Spy a new, fun gameplay style, when again, it's just too similar to stock. So for all those reasons, I put Spy in the C tier. So yeah, that's where I'd rank all the TF2 classes if they were given the Sharpened Volcano Fragment. I'd like to know your thoughts in the comments below. This video was a bit more experimental, I'm not sure if I'll be making any more like this, but if it does well, I probably will. Be sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell, and share with your friends. It'd really help out a first-time YouTuber like me. But until next time, I'm the Corruptest, and I'll see y'all.